Good morning, class, or good afternoon to you late sleepers. Today, in your math assignment, you're going to deal a lot with percentiles and percents. So let's do a quick review on that. So remember that percent literally means for every 100. Okay, cent means 100, per means for every 100. All right. So when we talk about 73%, that means that for every 100 things, you have 73 of them. Okay? Make sure you don't think that's a minus sign there. Okay? When you get a score on a test, let's say you scored 80% on a test. That means that if there were 100 questions on the test, you would have got 80 of them correct. But you might think, well, most tests don't have 100 questions. Okay, the last test you took maybe had 20 questions. So how does that equal 80%? Well, it's pretty easy. So to figure out how that equals 80%, you can do it a couple different ways. All right, you look at how many you got right. So in this case, if you got 80% on a 20-question test, you're going to find that you got 16 of them right. Okay, you had 16 right out of 20 questions. So to figure out the percent, there's two ways you can do it. One way is to figure out, well, how can I make 20 equal to 100? And the way we do that is we can figure out, well, 20 times 5 equals 100, and then we can times these both by 5. And if we did that, you would find that it equals 20 times 5 is 100. That was what we were wanting anyhow. 16 times 5 is 80. Here we are back at 80 out of 100, which is 80%. All right. Another way we could do that is we could take a fraction 16/20ths and figure out, well, what is that in 100? Take 100 times it. Okay. Now there's a couple different ways you can go about that, but the easy thing to remember is that you times it by the top and you divide it by the bottom, and you can do that in any order. Okay. You're going to times by the top, divide by the bottom. So I'm going to divide by the bottom first because I like to deal with small numbers. So 100 divided by 20, it's kind of, let's see, we'll do it over here. Divide that by 20. 20 goes into 10 0 times. 20 goes into 100 5 times. 5 times 0 is 0. 5 times 2 is 10. Subtract them. Got nothing. Okay, so I got 5. Okay, but I'm not done yet. All I've done is divided by the bottom. Oops, you can't even see that, can you? There you go. I'm not done yet. All I've done is divided by the bottom. I got to take this 5 and I got to times it by the top. So 16 times 5. 5 times 6 is 30. 5 times 1 is 5 plus 3 is 8. And there's my 80%. Okay. Times by the top, divide by the bottom. I could have done it in the other order. I could have taken 100 times 16. Okay. Move over here a minute. 100 times 16 would simply be 1,600. And then I got to divide by the bottom. Divide by 20. 20 cannot go into 16. 20 can go into 160 8 times. 8 times 0 is 0. 8 times 2 is 16. Subtract off. But I'm not done. I've got another 0 here. 20 into that 0, 0 times. And so 80 is my answer there also. So that's one way you can do it. All right. The other way to do it is to simply just divide the fraction. So you can take any fraction I give you. Okay, in this case we're dealing with 16/20ths still. But you can take any fraction I give you and you can turn it into a percent simply by dividing it. And you always divide the top by the bottom. Always, always, always. Okay? So this number is always divided by that number whenever you're dealing with a fraction. So let's take a look at that here. Get some space. 16 divided by 20. Okay, again, the top of the fraction goes in the box. 20 into 16, I cannot do that. 0 times, Mr. Hoefer. Okay, well, then we put a decimal mark right there. Decimal point. We throw in an extra 0 so we can keep working. 20 into 160. Well, if you remember from before, that's going to be 8. 8 times 0 is 0. 8 times 2 is 16. Subtract it off. I'm all done. 0.8, but that's not a percent yet, right? So to change your decimal into a percent, you've got one more step. You got to times it by 100. All right. Whenever you times something by 100, it's kind of like timesing it by 1, but you're gaining 2 decimal places. Okay, you're bumping it over 2 more places. So you can literally times that by 100 if you want. Okay, we could take 0.8 times, actually I'm going to stack it up here, times 100. Okay, 8 times 0 is 0, 8 times 0 is 0, 8 times 1 is 8. I've got one number behind the decimal, so I got to have one number behind the decimal. So what I have here is 80%. That's one way you can do it. Another way you can do it, if I've got 0.8 as an answer, all I got to do if I'm going to be timesing it by 100 is I got 2 zeros, and it's getting bigger, right? If we times something by 100, it's getting bigger. So you got to kind of think about that. It's getting bigger. So to make it get bigger, the decimal has to go this way, right? The number's going further out here towards these higher place values. If I move the decimal this way, it's getting smaller, right? It's going this way, getting smaller and smaller decimal numbers. So in this case, it's getting bigger by 2 zeros, which is going to make the decimal move 2 spots. 1, 2. So it'll wind up over here, and I got to put a little 0 in to hold value there. So again, I end up with 80%. All right. We're going to take a look at that a few more times here. Let's look at 12 over 15. I'm going to skip to just dividing it out, just because that's a tried and true method that you can use. Here we go. We got 12 in the box, 15 outside it. Again, top's always in the box. It's always dividing the top by the bottom. 15 cannot go into 12, so that's where I put a 0, put my decimal, throw on a 0 there. 15 into 120. Okay, if you know your facts, then you know that's an 8. If you don't know your facts, you might have to play around timesing 15 by different numbers till you get to 120 or close to it. In this case, I know it's an 8. 8 times 5 is 0. 8 times 5 is 40. And then 8 times 1 is 8 plus the 4, 12. We got nothing. We're good. All right, so 0.8. Hey, we're back to our 80%, aren't we? Times that by 100. Get 2 zeros, so the value is going to move 2 spots. Okay, it'll wind up over here. We got to put something in there, so we put a 0. 80%. All right, not all these are going to be 80%, I promise you. Let's look at 3/4. Okay, what percent would that be? Well, top divided by bottom. Okay, this pen's not working too good. All right, 4 cannot go into 3. We put our decimal down, we throw in a 0. 4 into 30. Well, 4 times 7 is 28. Subtract that. We got 2. All right. Still got space to work, so let's bring down our next number. There's no number, so we put down a 0. Anytime there's no number to bring down, you just make it a 0. 4 into 20, well, that's a 5. Okay, 5 times 4 is 20. We're all good. Everything's gone. 0.75. Well, I got to times that by 100 to make it a percent. There's 2 zeros, so I move it 2 spaces. Okay, so my percent is going to be 75%. Let's do one more time here. Let's go with a 14 out of 20. All right, again, top goes in the box. 20 goes outside. 20 cannot go into 14, so we put a 0 and a decimal. Put an extra 0 on there. 20 into 140. Well, if you cover this up, you can kind of tell. 2 into 14, well, goes in there 7 times. 7 times 0 is 0. 7 times 2 is 14. Nothing left. But now I got to times it by 100. 2 zeros, so 2 spaces. Throw in our 0 there. We have 70%. Hopefully that's making sense to you. We're going to take a look at a couple other situations you can get into. Excuse me. Let's look at making percents fractions. Okay, so if I had 83% and I want to make that a fraction, what would it be? Well, percent is out of 100, right? So 83% as a fraction is simply 83 over 100. Now, when you come to these, you've got to be careful because sometimes you can reduce them. You can find something you can divide the top and bottom by. In this case, there isn't, but sometimes there will be. For example, what if we had 44%? Well, that would be 44 over 100. And now look at this. We can divide both these by 4. 44 divided by 4, that's going to be 11. And 100 divided by 4, well, it's like a dollar divided into 4 parts. It's going to be 25, right? Let's do one more. Let's do, how about we do, let's do 65%. All right. So again, you just put it over 100, and then you see if you can reduce it. Well, that ends in 0 and that ends in 5. So that at least tells me I can divide by 5, right? 65 divided by 5, I happen to know is 13. And then 100 divided by 5 is 20, 13/20. So that's how you take a percent and turn it into a fraction. You start by just putting it over 100, and then you see, can you divide it down to something else? The last thing you need to know for today is actually the easiest. How do you take a percent, we'll go back to our 65%, and turn it into a decimal? Well, if you remember from the first part of the lesson, we were taking our decimal point and we're moving it over this way to get it to a percent, basically timesing it by 100. In this instance, to turn a percent to a decimal, you're just going to move it back the other way, basically dividing it by 100. So we could actually literally divide it by 100. We could have 65 in the box, 100 outside. We could say, well, 100 doesn't go into 65, put our decimal down, add a 0. 100 goes into 656 times. 6 times 0 is 0, 6 times 0 is 0, 6 times 1 is 6. 50 left over, bring down an imaginary 0. 100 into 500, 5 times. 5 times 0 is 0, 5 times 0 is 0, 5 times 1 is 5. We're all done, right? 0.65. That would be our answer. That's one way we can do it. But the other way we can do it is we can remember how we're moving our decimal point. Just like we moved it to the right to make it bigger, in this case, dividing something by 100 is making it smaller. And the decimal will move that way to the left to make it smaller. So again, you got to imagine you have a decimal point to the right of the number. Okay, that's always there, no matter what number I give you. If I say 7, it's actually technically 7 point. Okay, 7.000, whatever you want to say. Okay, if I give you 113, it's actually 113 point. Any number you're given in math technically has a decimal right to the right of it. Okay, unless you already see it in there. Like if I were to say 4.36, its decimal's already there, right? Oops, you can't see that. There you go. If I were to say 4.36, its decimal's already there. But anytime I give you a number without a decimal, 14, the decimal is technically to the right of it. So now let's go back to what we're talking about here. So to divide the percent by 100, a quick way, a little cheat way of doing it is you count the zeros in the 100, which there's 2, and you move it 2 spaces. So 65% as a decimal is 0.65. All right. If I had 13%, well, decimal would be there, move it 2 spaces. That's going to be equal to 0.13. All right. What if I only had 5%? Check this out. Decimal's here, right? Move it 2 spaces. 1, 2. Well, we got to put something in here, so we put a 0. So it's 0.05 is 5%. Hopefully that makes sense. I'm going to be working a lot with percents today in math. As you need help, please reach out to me, email me. We'll Zoom, we'll talk it through. I'll see if I can make better sense out of it with you individually. Hope you have a great day.